Okay, so very quickly, my name is Dabir Abbas, and if there is any specific thing that you want to ask me regarding A-level physics, I'll be open for that. Otherwise, what I had in mind for today's class is we can go over paper 3 because I think it is one of those papers that is uh, something that is either practiced not as much as it should be, or there are a lot of things that people don't know as far as solving this paper is concerned. Because for both of the experiments, even if you don't know how to do the experiment, you could still get 18 out of 20 just by making sure that just by making sure that these certain aspects are taken into account. So before I start with that, I am still waiting for any specific questions. If just in case, as you can see on my screen, when you go into more, you can click on chat, and here you can message me your questions. So I am open for these questions. If that is not possible and if that is not convenient, then the other thing is you can also open your mic and communicate your questions by voice to me also. That would be even more convenient. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go over certain aspects of paper 3, and if in between you have any question, I'll be open for that. So as far as paper 3 is concerned, uh, very simply, you have two questions that you get. So question number 1 generally is about data manipulation, tabulation, and question number 2 generally is about a certain looking at a certain experiment and seeing how we could improve the experiment, plus looking at certain aspects like sig fix and so for everyone who has just joined in, I would again reiterate that if in case you have any questions, you can contact me through the chat. For the chat, you can press Control H and type in your questions. The second thing is you can open your voice and communicate to me directly. Okay, so as far as paper 3 is concerned, let's look at question number 1. So what I have in front of you is basically an example candidate response that I felt that when I discussed with my class, I felt that it was very useful for everyone because there are certain things that you need to know when looking at paper 3. So let's look at question number 1 here. Let's look at question number 1 here. So question number 1 in this specific year was, in this experiment you will investigate a wooden strip acted by several forces. So what's happening is that you have certain forces or variable forces being applied on this assembly, and because of this force, the length of the spring and the angle both are changing. So if very simply, now this is something that I suggest for everyone, that whenever you're looking at any practical question, always from the beginning know what are the independent, dependent and control variables. So for this very simple experiment, the independent variable is the mass and the dependent variable is the angle and the length. So the dependent variables are theta and y, And for control variables, we can talk about the mass of the spring holder. We can talk about the uh, spring used here. So for this experiment, one of the control variables is that if you change the spring, or if you use a spring of a different uh, spring constant, obviously the entire results of the experiment will change. So here are basically four aspects to an experiment that I have already talked to you about. Now, so generally, the first bit that they'll ask you is, in this question, they've asked you to record the mass. Now, the mass that has been recorded here is basically done in 100 grams. Now, why is that so? One of the things is that in this experiment, what must have happened was that the mass that was given to you was given as a discrete quantity, was already mentioned to you rather than you measuring it, which is why, since you're not measuring it, there are no decimal places here, and you've written mass as it is. But when you look at the length and the angle, here's the interesting bit. So for the length, they must have given you a meter rule, and we all know that the meter rule has a minimum, uh, has a precision of 0.1 centimeter. And when you look at the angle is always measured using a protractor. And now here's the interesting part. The protractor has a smallest unit of 1 degree, which is why when you look at this, when you look at these readings, number one problem that we can look at is the fact that the person has written the reading as 4.50 centimeter. Now, why this is wrong is because the hello, Majid, can you hear me? Hello. Am I audible to everyone? Okay. Okay, good. You can hear me. So the first thing is, now the reason why this is wrong is because you cannot give an answer to 2 decimal places with a device that only gives you answer to 1 decimal place. The correct answer here would have been 4. So the reading here would be 4.5 rather than 4.50. And in this case, the reading will be 67, not 67.0, not 67.00. So that is the first thing that you have to take into account. You have to always make sure that the decimal places, so remember that the decimal places for the measured value is always dependent on the least count of the instrument, which is for ruler 0.1 centimeter, and for a protractor it's 1 degree. Okay, let's move on. Now, another thing that you must have noticed is that wherever the examiner asks you to measure and record, please, you need to take at least 2 averages and at maximum 3 averages for question number 1. So the averages are important because it is something that the examiner wants to look at, because it's something that in a scientific procedure you should always take into account. Similarly, if you look at it, then for a different mass, they have also given you the same readings. Now, let's move to the table. Now, in the table, what they've simply done is they've repeated these readings for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, a lot of people ask me this question that should the first reading be included in the table? Yes, it can be included in the table. The second thing is, again, the two dependent variables, both of them are given to a certain, are given with two averages. So that's the second thing that you need to understand. The third thing is down the column. So you have to understand that we have two types of quantities. So y, we can say that the quantity y and theta are the quantities that you're measuring, whereas m sine theta is the quantity that is calculated. So for a measured quantity, you need to be very careful about the decimal places. But for a calculated quantity, you need to be careful about the significant figures. So when you look at the decimal places, you can see that the decimal places for y are same throughout, and the decimal places for theta are same throughout. Whereas when you look at m sine theta, the significant figures are 3, which is throughout the column. So this is one of the that you need to very, very carefully understand. Now, moving on, we move to the graph. So you've taken 6 readings, you have taken their averages, you have taken care of the decimal places, you've taken care of the significant figures. What next? And for those of you who has just joined in, guys, you can communicate your questions to me through the chat or through a voice note or through opening your voice. I'm open to both. Now, when you look at the graph, you can see that the reason why this graph is a best fit graph is because this particular line, I cannot move it in any manner to give me a better distribution of the points. A lot of people sometimes worry that they draw a graph. So please try to understand this thing. The reason why I say that you can get you can get 18 marks without even knowing how to do the experiment before is because let's suppose worst case scenario, you enter into the room, you look at the practical, you read the question, you don't know what to do. You can try doing it, but in the first 10 minutes, let's suppose you are not able to set up the apparatus, simply call the examiner or simply call the lab assistant who is there and ask them to help you with it. If you're going to be offered less help, if you're going to be offered minimal kind of help, they're going to simply deduct 1 mark. And if you take any major help, which is like setting up the entire apparatus, then they're going to deduct 2 marks. But let's suppose those 2 marks are deducted and you're good to go. From then onward, these 6 marks, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marks, so these 10 marks plus 3 marks are all things that you can get for you can get without even knowing how to construct. Then these 2 marks again are the marks that you can achieve. The 4 marks here are the marks that you can achieve simply by doing the question correctly after you have a setup apparatus in front of you. Now guys, since the purpose of this class was that it had to be a Q&A class, I am still open for any questions on paper 3 question number 1. The reason why I have specified it is because you can then focus your questions, but in case you have questions other than that, I'm also open for that. So I would suggest that you do send in your questions so that we can have a more meaningful Q&A session, because a Q&A session cannot happen without questions, obviously. Now, having said that, so let's suppose uh, we have these values, and in this graph, the graph had to be plotted for y against m sine theta. Y is on y-axis, m sine theta is on x-axis. Now, things that you need to take into account when you're plotting the graph. Number one, the units of each quantities on both axes. The fact that the x-axis, on the x-axis, your line or your points. So let's suppose this is one extreme of your points, and this is the other extreme of your points. So this portion should be more than 75% of the graph. But I have even a simpler method for you to look at it. Simply what you have to do is, the values on the x-axis should be more than, or should fall into onto a length that is more than half the length. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks. So 4 or more blocks for x-axis, 6 and more blocks for y-axis. That is going to basically suffice that requirement. After that, you plot the graph, make sure that the plotting is done correctly, because obviously you can lose mark if the plots are not correct. And then you draw the line. Now the line, let's suppose even if I had points like this, and this line wasn't passing through these points, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that the line that you've drawn, is that line a best fit or not? If it's not a best fit, then you're going to lose marks. But if it's a best fit, then you will obviously be marked and graded for it. Now, one more thing that students basically don't really a lot of times make mistakes in. This basically, okay, guys, so first of all, I think there are a few people who cannot either hear me. So for that, you can switch on the audio by clicking on the mic. If the mic is obviously off, so you cannot hear me. Other than that, if you want to chat, you can go into more and you can click on chat and you can talk to me. So I think Najia, you can hear me. Is there any specific question that you have for me? Ahmed Shah, Maha, and Majid. I'm open for questions for A-level physics or specifically paper 3. But I hope that everybody can hear me at least. If yes, kindly give an affirmative answer in the chat. Okay, so anybody who has hello, am I audible to everyone? Guys, since this is a Q&A session, so you can write down your questions on the chat, for which you can click on more, and the first thing that you can see there is the chat option. So kindly let me know in the chat if you have any questions. we are specifically looking at A-level physics. Hello, can everybody hear me? Okay, let me just complete with question number 1 and then I'll again pause for questions. So let's suppose you now have the readings. Now, the only and another thing that you need to take into account is the fact that in this particular question, you were given discrete values of your independent variable. Let's suppose that is not the case. Let's suppose the independent variable is a length and you're told that you can use the length of a ruler between 20 centimeter to 60 centimeter. Now, a lot of times the mistake that people make and then lose 1 mark on the mark for the range is by taking values which are 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, and that's 6 values that you've taken. You will get for these 6 marks 5 out of 6. Now, the reason why that is so is because when I take your maximum value and I subtract from it your minimum value, that value has to be maximum minus minimum should be greater than equal to half the range. Majid, I think that's the most often asked question. I think the safest bet for these exams is that you can start with 3 years of past paper. Simply do them by understanding them. So what you can do is you can take the past papers, you can start solving questions, and for each and every past paper, simply maintain a journal in which you write down the things that you've learned. So by the end of the 3 past papers, you'd actually have a notes copy which is going to have a lot of things that you don't know, then repeat it for another 2 years and then repeat those 5 years past papers, because with 1 month left for all these things, I don't think going back to specific topics is going to help. However, what you can do is you can look at the exact past paper questions. Okay, so Emma Shah has a question: how do we calculate the uncertainty in a vernier caliper while recording the diameter of a wire? So first of all, you need to understand that this is a question that comes in question number 2 for the practical paper. Now, there are 2 things that you need to understand. Number 1, vernier caliper as an instrument itself has a precision of 0.01 centimeter. So if you are a perfect human being who is not capable of making any mistake and you're using a vernier caliper, even then you will have an uncertainty of 0.01 centimeter. But at the very same time, if you are obviously somebody who is using a certain procedure, or you are using or you maybe are taking readings from certain places, what you basically do is you look at your experimental procedures. Experimental procedures could include how are you using the vernier caliper to take the reading, plus state of the experimenter. So a lot of times what happens is that when you're doing the experiment, you feel that a single person cannot handle all the equipment. So because of these two things, what happens is that you have an influx of random error. And now a safe way to uh, consider random error is to simply double this and add into it. So if a vernier caliper has an uncertainty of 0.01 centimeter, and I have a question, so I have a question where I am asked to basically give a value. Simply what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a value of 0.03 centimeter. That's it. This is going to be my absolute uncertainty. Similar is the case. So if I have a stopwatch, for the stopwatch, my absolute uncertainty can be 0.5 seconds. Now, Sahar has a question. Can you explain eddy currents? Now, sir, as far as eddy currents is concerned, there are two things that you need to take into account. Number one, that this topic falls under electromagnetic induction and is something that is of a nuisance when we're talking about transformers. So what happens is that when we are looking at, okay, so when we're looking at a transformer, so a transformer has an iron core, and iron we all know is a conductor. It has coils on both sides. Now what's happening is that these coils have current flowing in it, which is varying, which creates a varying magnetic field. And this iron core makes sure that that magnetic field is trapped in this area. So good so far. Next, the problem is that we consider the current induced in the secondary coil as a useful output of transformer. So I don't care if there is any other conductor that has current being induced into it, as long as the secondary coil has some sort of current flowing in it. And that is what we take, that is what we worry when we're studying the theory. But practically speaking, the iron itself is a conductor. So what do we have here? We have a conductor which is present in a varying magnetic field. Because this conductor is present in a varying magnetic field, there is also a current that is induced within it. Now the problem is that according to the second thing now is the Lenz's law. Lenz's law states that the current induced will always be such that it will create problems for the original magnetic field. So let's suppose if the original magnetic field is in a certain direction, then the magnetic field due to this current induced is going to decrease its value. So what happens is that what happens is that when you have a conductor, and that conductor is in a varying magnetic field, then according to the Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction, some sort of current is induced. So we know that the iron core has some current in it. Lenz's law tells us that that current is obviously going to be in the direction, or will be producing a magnetic field that actually decreases the influence of the original magnetic field, which makes the transformer less than 100% efficient. Now, how do we overcome them? We overcome them by slicing the iron core. So rather than having one solid piece of the iron core, we slice the iron core and place insulators within it, which basically results in smaller circuits of currents. And like this, number one, you will decrease the amount of current that is being induced in the iron core. You will also further decrease the amount of current by having insulators within the each slice, and then cumulatively lesser current is going to result in lesser magnetic field being taken away from the experiment. So thank you, sir. It was a very good question. It's a concept that a lot of people are unsure of. Now, any other question? Guys, we're into last 10 minutes, so I'm open for all these questions. Majid, I know the answer is not that engaging, uh, because unfortunately there isn't any shortcut to this. You have to start from somewhere. I think when you do it from the past papers, that's the most focused past paper practice. That's the most focused preparation that you can do, especially you have only under a month left. The second thing is, obviously, guys, what I can help you guys with is we are also having a very quick Asher session of a week for both AS and A levels. So we're going to have one session for AS, and simultaneously we'll have another session for A levels, and both in within a week we're going to basically look at the major topics and 10 most important questions from each topic. So I think for those of you who have a lot of problem, that could actually really help. Okay, Emma, that's a very huge question to explain CT scanning. uh, and maybe in the next session, next Q&A session that we have, I can maybe help you out with the CT scanning. But because it's very difficult to explain it simply using the diagrams. So maybe next time in the next Q&A session that we have, I'll probably have the diagrams of CT scan with myself so that I can explain to you this question. Any other question? Because that's a very huge question. CT scanning is basically revolves around telling you different parts of the CT scan, and then how is the scan actually calculated. But a very simple answer could be that as long as you understand how a 2D image is made in an X-ray machine, the simple thing in the case of CT scan is that we simply add another dimension into it. So CT scan basically gives us 3D image. But I'm sorry, that's a very long question. Had you asked this question in the beginning, I would have probably be able to more help you with it. Any other questions? So last 5 minutes, very quickly, let me tell you that between 21st to 27, Ahmed, if you really want to uh, revise these things, so one of the ways that we can do that is between 21st to 27th, we'll basically be looking at the exact topics from different sections of the syllabus. We'll have this session for AS and A2. If you want to contact, you can contact by with a certain number unless I get this number. So Nafe has this question: can you explain the calculation of half-life? So this is the number, guys. If you want more information about this pressure session, what I will also be doing is I'll be giving you a mock examination, and with the 10-year experience that I have, normally my mock grades translate into the grades that you get in CIE. Now, Nafe, Mushtaba, you have a question. Explain the calculation of half-life. So when you're calculating half-life, one of the ways that you can do that is the half-life is basically equivalent to. Now, first of all, understand that whenever something is decaying through half-life, it always happens. It always takes an exponential curve. So the initial count rate divided by the final count. So if I take the final count and I divide it by the initial count, that is equal to half raised to the power of the number of half-lives. So normally people have problems in this calculation because these calculations are in the form of either exponential, or these calculations are in the form of log. So if you have problems with this, then maybe what you need to revisit is the log topic and how to manipulate logs with the exponentials. Nafe, have I answered your question, or is there anything more specific that you're trying to ask? You can even open your voice and you can let me know about your question. Guys, we have last 3 minutes, so kindly hurry up. Okay, okay, thank you. Any other question? Okay, guys, so this would be the last time. Uh, the session, the crasher for AS and A2 will be simultaneously held between 21st to 27th of this month. The charges for each session is 4,000. At the end of the session, you will be given a mock exam that I will check and mark for you. Other than that, we will go over all of the major topics and all of the major concept in your AS and A2 with certain practice questions that I will give you, which are good from an examination point of view that I've streamlined after years of experience. So I guess if you do that questions, you'd probably be in a position to end up with B. But if obviously you want to go towards an A, for that you should be doing a lot of unseen practice, because one of the major problems that people have with A levels exam is throughout 2 years you get a lot of practice questions which you have already attempted, because the pool of the question is generally the past papers. So what I would suggest is that you do go to other boards, like that you go towards other sources like pre-university questions or OCR questions. Again, if you need more information on the session from 21st to 27, the contact number is, I'll write it more clearly, 0332 888 6748. So I hope, guys, this was helpful. Although I would have appreciated more questions from your side, but for the little time that we had, I would thank you for coming here and sharing your problems and giving me an opportunity to help you with it. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.